And that's the challenge with electric stuff. And that's why in the small motor area and the small boat area, they're doing well. And there's a lot of competitors now that are 3 horsepower. And there's a lot of competitors that are in the 6 kilowatt, which is 9.9 horsepower equivalent
Mm-hmm.
um, arena. But when you look at a 6 kilowatt electric outboard, even with a great set of batteries, everything brand new, running optimally, it cannot hit the same top speed that a 9.9 gas can hit. And
Mm.
that's even looking at a 4 stroke, not even looking at the, 2 strokes,
Yeah.
can deliver more power per weight.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well, it
yeah,
kind of goes back to what you're
it
saying about the RPM band and how, that horsepower based on your RPM band is going to be where it's developing that amount of horsepower and then
yeah,
delivering that to the propeller, where in the battery, the motor only spins. I really don't know. I don't know how to put it into words to describe it. I mean, I kind of understand it in my mind, but I don't really know how how to explain it, which is what I try to do. I try to figure out a way to
right.
explain things into the most third grade words that I can, because I think that that is actually helpful to people, where you can like understand what someone's saying. Because yeah, the gas engine is going to create more power at the top end than it is in the mid range, whereas the
Right.
electric produces the same amount of power all the time.
Yeah. And uh, you were talking about RPMs, and that's one of the things that's really interesting. I was looking at the specs of the e-propulsion Navy 6, and I believe its top RPMs is like 17 or 1800.
Wow.
And I believe a 9.9 gas motor probably is turning 3,000 RPMs maybe at top speed. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to look it up to compare. Um, but I have a feeling that a 10 horsepower gas motor is turning more RPMs. And if you think about it, that's spinning a prop. So therefore, if you're turning more RPMs, you're going to spin that prop faster and the boat's going to go faster.
Yes, exactly. So a 9.9 Mercury has an RPM range of 5 to 6,000 RPM.
Wow. So way more RPMs.
Yeah.
Now, people would say, then why doesn't the electric outboard just, why don't they, have it spin more RPMs? And I think because of the battery draw, and I think the heat from the motor, because a lot of these also, they don't have any impeller. They don't really even have any cooling system. Like a lot of them, the motor is underwater
Yeah.
at the prop, and that's all that cools it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I didn't realize that they only spun to now. If the motor is down there at the prop, you have a direct drive where you don't have like, so on like on a gasoline engine, you got your engine spinning and it is going down to your lower unit. And then you have a gear reduction of the engine spinning 5,000 RPM, but through gear reduction, like you have a 2-to-1 ratio, your propeller might only be spinning 2,500 RPM. But
Right.
if the electric motor is topping out at 1,700 RPM and your gasoline engine is topping out at 3,200, 3,000 RPM, you're
Right.
gonna go way faster, because the pitch of the propeller, your distance in the water that it is moving is twice as much. You're going twice,
Right.
it's
Right.
double. I
Yeah.
wonder how
Yeah.
they can get around that. It's not.
So yeah, to me it seems like I was trying to think of like what would be the perfect way for them to do this, and I always feel like maybe if every motor sold was about like the top speed that motor can achieve on this size of a boat, how big of a boat this motor can push, and how heavy the motor is. Like
Mhm.
maybe that becomes the new formula, and there's some number. But also, it's sort of like some of this stuff is semantics because
Yeah.
we know that two-stroke gas motors sometimes can feel very different and have a much different top end than a four-stroke. And it's not
Mhm.
just necessarily the weight. Marek, you did a recent video about that too.
Yeah.
Um, because a two-stroke is giving you power on twice as many strokes and much less moving parts inside. It's a
Mhm.
much cruder, simpler engine.
Yeah.
Um, but so its power to weight ratio is higher, but also its ability to transfer that into, people. Some of them people say, "Oh, I don't see any difference," and there's a lot of people out there that go, "Man, you take a 15 horsepower gas four stroke, and you take a 15 horsepower, what did I say, four stroke? Yeah, and you compare it to the two stroke, and they'll really feel a difference in the whole shot
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
how it
100%.
accelerates.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
100% because four stroke you lose efficiency because with the four stroke every two rotations of the crankshaft is what creates power where a two stroke it creates power with every rotation. So you
yeah,
basically doubled in efficiency with a two stroke which means you are creating power twice as fast theoretically, I mean like,
yeah. Right.
so yeah, that's for sure. Now I wonder how does the voltage play into this? Because like, at what point does it go from here's a 12 volt, 36 volt, 48 volt? Like what are most of the electrics on a 48-volt system or are they on like do you know much about that?
Yeah. So most of your 3 horsepower range electrics, which is your Newport NT300, Torqeedo makes, I can't remember, there's, it might be the 1003 or the Travel, the e-propulsion Spirit 1.0 plus, um, Remigo 1, uh, that's just coming to this country now. It's sold in Europe. And I think Parson has one now. There's a few other companies that all have these 3 horsepower electrics. Most of them are 48-volt systems. Newport, theirs is a 36-volt system. I don't know
Hmm.
why.
Hmm.
Um, and there's some smart people who've told me it has to do with how you're converting it and blah, 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 and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Um, and I just go, why is it 36 and everybody else is doing 48?
Yeah.
And that's one of the factors that a lot of people don't think about. Like Hankai on Amazon and eBay, you can buy these cheap Hankai electric outboards.
Mm-hmm.
The motor's up in the motor unit. I did a video about one, and it has a gearbox, and it's awful. It's a $200 electric outboard that's about 3 or 4 horsepower. It's a horrible, loud, crude motor, but it's $200.
Yeah.
And so people will buy that going, oh, cool. I don't have to pay 1,500 for an e-propulsion. I can get this Hankai one for 200 from Amazon. I win. Well, now
Yeah.
you got to go buy that battery. And you need a 48-volt battery with a certain amount of amp hours
Mm,
to be able to take it out and run it and use it.
right.
And the battery now costs you, $600 or $700. So your $200 motor now almost becomes $1,000 motor.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so you spend almost $1,000 and you've got a junky motor. Nice battery. Yeah.
like the 36 to 48 what I because I compare a lot of this to trolling motors, because I know
Sure.
more about trolling motors than I do about the propulsion, the electric outboard world,
Yeah.
where, the big difference in a lot of the big ones, Garmin, PowerPole, some of the Minn Kotas, Simrad or basically the Navico stuff, like when you get to the bigger stuff, they're duals. So you can have a 36 or a 48. You can hook it up to a
Right.
36-volt battery. That is a 36-volt trolling motor. You hook it up to a 48-volt, it's a 48-volt trolling motor. And the thrust is what differences it. So like
Mm-hmm.
at 36 volts, it might be, a 90 pound thrust. At a 48 volt, it's a 110 or 120 pound thrust. So,
Right.
you know,
But
I,
also, I think your runtime probably changed. Like if you ran it at full
yeah.
speed, I think you have. And once again, this is where the math gets a little. Math people can figure this stuff out right away. They go, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, your estimated runtime will be less because you're do your amps to volts to watts conversions, and you'll. Um, but I just know it's different
Yeah,
whenever
you
you're
would think
running
it
a
would be kind of inverted where with the 36 volt, you would be getting, a farther distance. But
right.
at the same token, to be the devil's advocate here, that really doesn't matter about the motor. What has any kind of jurisdiction over that is the battery. Like
Correct.
if you
Correct.
got a higher
Yeah.
amp hour battery at 48 than you do like, 36, or same thing. If you have the identical amp hour batteries, you would think because you're 48, if you're spinning higher RPM, you're going to go farther than 36 because more speed, more, distance, less speed, less distance. They're both going to die at the same time because they're both 100 amp hour, whatever, but,
Yeah.
but again, I'm not a doctor. So,
Right. Yeah. So when we get to the bigger electric outboards, a lot of them go even higher voltage. So e-propulsion has this new like X series, and they are 96-volt
oh,
systems.
wow.
So at minimum, you're buying two 48-volt batteries.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed when you were at the Mercury booth at the Miami show, the video that I hope everybody now has bookmarked to watch after this one, um, that the Mercury ones, if you notice, their larger motors are still running 48 volt, which I think is interesting,
Yeah.
because they're not making you have to get a 96-volt system.
Hmm.
However, Mercury also wants you to only use their proprietary batteries,
Yeah.
and I feel I understand why they do that, and there are advantages to it in terms of simplicity and having things talk to each other, to be
Hmm.
able to have it estimate runtime, range, battery, information with the motor, and that's great. However, the bad thing is that Mercury then is in the battery business, and if they're ordering a bunch of batteries to put in their cases to sell with their motors, and battery tech takes a leap and a bound over the course of a year, Mercury batteries will be a year behind other aftermarket batteries you can buy in terms of price and quality and
Well, I mean,
weight and everything.
I can give you a little bit of clarity on that one because, Brunswick owns Mercury, but
Yep.
Brunswick owns Relion too. So Relion lithium batteries, Brunswick owns both of those. So it's kind of like it's kind of like,
Synergy. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Which
Yeah.
which nothing at Brunswick is synergistic. I mean, look at a Boston Whaler. It's made by everything in the boat is owned by Brunswick, and it's
Right.
there's
Yeah. Yeah. So there is theoretical synergy, but like
yeah.
one of the things I really liked was that I got into this last year was that, so when I bought an e-propulsion Spirit electric outboard,
Hmm.
it comes with, you don't have to use it, but it comes with a proprietary battery that basically fits on top of it, and it looks like an outboard motor because the thing looks ridiculous without this battery clip to it. And uh, but their battery is 28 amp hours and weighs a certain amount and costs a certain amount of money. And if you buy a special cable to go from their connector to a regular battery, you
Hmm.
can buy an aftermarket battery and save a few $100s.
Yep.
So this year, that was one of the things I tested, and I even was able to test it with a 100 amp hour 48-volt battery. So therefore, my e-propulsion Spirit was able to run 4 times the amount of time it would normally run on the e-propulsion battery,
Yeah.
and I just kept the e-propulsion battery sitting there just in case I needed it to get home.
Right.
And it's not like people say, oh well, it's just like bringing extra fuel, and it is and it isn't, because yes, a battery is an expensive one-time cost, but that's extra fuel you can bring with you forever, and you don't have to worry about you know filling it back up again, or hooking up fuel lines or anything. You just swap your cord
Hmm.
and off you go.
Yeah, that's kind of the elephant in the room, is the cost of everything, which
Yeah.
I mean, that's for anything really, anything you buy, the cost plays a big factor there. How does that do you find that there's like a horsepower difference or like maybe a power spot where it really changes over? Because like if you look, okay, the 180, the Vision Marine 180,
Yeah.
to buy the motor, to buy the batteries and get that whole setup. I mean, you're talking tens of thousands, like 50 grand or something. I don't know the true
Yeah.
cost, but it's up there.
It's way up there. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like a $50,000 setup. Whereas if you bought a 175 Mercury or Suzuki, take your pick, it's a 15, $20,000 setup. So it's almost double. What is there? But you were talking about the 3 horsepower is, by the time you buy the motor and you buy the battery, you're only a few $100s more. Have you seen like a spot where that kind of like levels out, or um, you know,
So unfortunately, as we know, the reality of the way the world is, prices always go up, and we don't know where prices are going to go with a lot of this stuff over the next few years. Um, Truth is that a lot of this stuff is made overseas, and I don't want to get political, but that can change how the pricing is. Supply and demand, the small niche that boating is, all of those factors come into play. I remember a few years ago when I was first looking at electric stuff, I started thinking about, okay, what does the electric outboard cost with the battery, and what does a gas motor cost? And you'd go, okay, well, you're spending $500 more up front for the electric one for 3 horsepower, or 800 or 1,000 or whatever. But over the course of 8 to 10 years, your savings and fuel and everything else, it's going to win. Um, the unknown was that, is that battery going to last you 10 years? Is that motor going to last you 10 years? Because it was new and people were looking at this going, I don't know if these batteries are any good. I had a battery go bad that I got from Newport. I didn't maintain it over the winter. Your lithium iron phosphate batteries, they'll go to sleep, and there's people who know tricks to wake them up. And some of them are literally like putting like a 9-volt battery between some leads and jumping it and doing these kinds of things. And obviously, all of that stuff is do at your own risk. Do not listen to what I say about it, because I was looking some of those things up and considering it with that battery when it went to sleep. And I liked the fact that I got to experience that, and then I was able to share that with my audience. Nobody watched that video, nobody cared, but uh, right. But I've also had other batteries that I have abused and neglected, and they're working just fine. I have one that I left sitting in my open whaler all winter long. There's just a piece of plastic sitting on top of it, and it's not plastic sheeting. It's a piece of like a plastic board that I just like plopped on top of the battery. And I thought, you know what? Because people might say, "Oh, well, Wayne, you're an idiot" or whatever. I I do this. I make content, and I do these kinds of things because I want to see what happens in those situations, and I want to be able to share that. I have that luxury. If you're buying a battery and you're on a budget, and that battery costs you, this particular battery was like a $1,700 battery. If you're buying that, that's a big expense. You know what I mean? You're not gonna, some people will abuse it, but you may accidentally leave it out in the weather. It may get in freezing conditions. And I thought to myself, it weighed 100 pounds. I'm like, I don't feel like taking it out of the boat. And I thought, I'm going to do an experiment and see what happens. And I just put a piece of like PVC board on top of it, and it just sat out there all winter. And I was using it the other day. It's fine. And I didn't even follow like the chart, like bringing it back to life, charging stuff or whatever. I checked it one time in January when I went out there. I turned it on. I'm like, yeah, it works. I checked the app on the phone. Yeah, it's working. Shut it back off again, and here it is. Almost March, and I fired it up, and it's
Wow.
fine.
Yeah, they definitely that. I mean, lithium holds that out, but Maryland, I mean, that's a cold winter. Like you guys had a really cold
This year was
winter this
rough.
year too, so that's kind of
Yeah,
interesting that it was able to withstand that. Um,
yeah,
that. Well, speaking of the charging, let's kind of cover that before closing out here. That so
yeah.
when it comes to the charging, is it like, well, I guess it all depends on how big the system is, but for the most part, is it pretty much like a one night thing? Like you can like bring it in, like if you deploy that battery to 20%, 10% during the day, you plug that thing in the next day, are you good to go? Or like what have you found?
Yeah, so keep in mind when we're talking about these motors, I'm literally just talking about the 3 horsepower ones. I don't have any experience with the ones that are like more than 10 horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just now getting into some of the above 3 horsepower motors right now.
Right.
That's one of my things I'm trying to work on a lot more this year. So with the 3 horsepower ones, Newport, Sea Propulsion, Spirit, or whatever, everybody worries about it running out of juice, leaving them stranded, and how long it's going to take to recharge. And I was worried too. And I remember when I got my first one of those, I went out in the boat and I brought a gas motor that was sitting on the floor of the boat with me in case and I did that the first 2 trips. And then I was like, "Oh, I don't need to bring this anymore." And I boat in a river and towboat. People use sea tow and those kinds of things. Whatever.
Yeah.
Towboat US is literally on my creek, and so I was just like, I used to have a towboat membership with my bigger boats, and when I got rid of my bigger boats, I was like, I'll just get a towboat membership. And they're like, "What size boat do you have?" And I'm like, 13 foot, and they're like, Okay, you want to pay $50 for a towboat membership?" And I'm like, yeah, I do, because I thought to myself, that's my life insurance.
Yeah.
That's my, not life insurance, that's my insurance policy. So now what I do is I don't think twice about it. I just go out, and I've never called towboat. Um, what happens is that when these batteries start to get low, if you haven't checked your gauge or your app or whatever and realize that you're running low on juice, they'll kind of go into a limp mode and they won't
Mm,
let you go full speed anymore.
okay.
And as we mentioned earlier, your range increases when you throttle down.
Yeah.
And unless you're in windy conditions or strong currents or whatever, which obviously that's dangerous, um, but you can just throttle back and you just go home a little bit slower. I mean, you hear people who been out fishing all day in a real boat
Yeah.
and they had to come home with their trolling motor because their gas motor failed or whatever. They're like, yeah, I brought my trolling motor home. It took me an hour to get back to the marina. They do it with a trolling motor. It's the same thing with one of these electric outboards.
Yeah.
You just crank it back.
Hey there, sorry to take you away from the video, but real quick, did you know that on average a boat owner will spend between $1,000 and $5,000 a year just on servicing their engine? And you could actually pocket and save a lot of that money if you would just do the service yourself. It might seem like a daunting task, but I guarantee you virtually everyone can do it with our guidance and the Boaters program. This is just one skill that you could learn inside the program because we have hundreds of other videos teaching you all kinds of boating skills, as well as a weekly live stream where we have questions and answers with me, as well as a chat feature where you can send videos and pictures, ask all kinds of questions, or look for some advice or some guidance on a project that you're doing on your boat. And we've made it super easy because you can start and stop the program at any time. So you could actually join, do a few videos, learn a few skills, and then when you're not using your boat, like say you have an off season, you can stop using the program, pause your membership, and then when you need to use it again, you can just start the membership back up and have instant access to all the content. You can join the program by hitting the first link in the description, clicking join, or visiting bornagainboating.com. Now back to the video.